Maya Ellington never planned to speak. A 10-year-old black girl standing in the shadows of a billionaire's penthouse wasn't supposed to make a sound. Not in a room full of powerful white men who didn't even see her as a person. But the moment she realized a $250 million lie was about to be signed into history, something inside her cracked open. Her heart pounded, her palms trembled, and for the first time in her life, she felt the weight of a truth too big to swallow. She knew that if she opened her mouth, she could destroy everything. Her mother's job, their only income, even their safety. But if she stayed silent, a dangerous fraud would go unchallenged. All because no one expected a black child to know anything at all. And then Maya did the unthinkable. "Stay with me." What she said next shattered the entire room. Maya Ellington had learned early in life what it meant to be noticed for all the wrong reasons. Most days, she didn't mind being invisible. It was easier than enduring the stares that followed a black girl who wandered too close to wealth. But today, standing inside the gleaming penthouse of Whitmore Tower, even hiding in the corner felt like standing under a spotlight. Her mother, Danielle Ellington, moved quietly through the room, placing coasters under crystal glasses, wiping fingerprints off marble, keeping her head down the way life had taught her. Danielle wasn't ashamed of who she was, a hard-working black woman who raised her daughter with more love than money. But she understood this world. These wealthy men weren't used to seeing people who looked like her unless they were serving drinks. And today, the room was packed with men in tailored suits worth more than her annual income. At the center of it all sat Grant Whitmore, the billionaire whose calm presence commanded the room. Around him hovered a cluster of investors, all eager for him to sign the deal of a lifetime. A $250 million document that lay stretched across the mahogany table like some ancient treasure. Then there was Preston Hale, the so-called expert, who carried himself with the smooth arrogance of a man who believed no one, especially not a black woman or her child, could ever disrupt him. Preston's eyes skimmed over Danielle, the way someone might glance at a smudge on a mirror. Then they slid to Maya and narrowed. "Didn't we agree the room would be free of distractions?" he said loudly, air quoting the last word as if Maya were some kind of inconvenience rather than a child breathing the same air. Danielle stiffened. "She'll stay out of the way, sir." Preston smirked. "I'm sure she will. Folks like her usually know how to stay in their place." A quiet heat crawled up Maya's neck, but she kept her gaze low. She knew that tone. Polite cruelty dressed up as professionalism. She'd heard it before. Still, she clutched her great-grandfather's weather journal tighter. It was her comfort, her anchor. The faded brown leather smelled like old paper, and nights spent listening to stories of a man who'd dedicated his life to uncovering truth. From her corner, she watched everything. The nervous shuffling, the greedy smiles, the hush that spread as Preston unrolled the parchment. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. The script was perfect. The parchment was the exact color of aging history. The wax seal shone a deep crimson, but something about it felt wrong. The paper was too uniform, the ink too black, and the seal, the tiny shape stamped into its center, didn't match what she'd seen countless times in her great-grandfather's journals. Her heart thudded. What if this whole thing is a lie? The thought whispered through her mind. Maya looked at her mother across the room. Danielle's eyes were tired, not from lack of sleep, tired from a lifetime of being underestimated, dismissed, blamed for things she didn't do. Maya's stomach twisted. Preston was talking again, his voice dripping charm. "This document," he declared proudly, "is a historical artifact granting ownership of land richer than Fort Knox. Gentlemen, we are standing on the brink of history," the investors murmured with awe. Grant Whitmore leaned forward, finally showing a spark of excitement, and that's when Maya caught it. The fatal flaw, a tiny mark on the seal, one that shouldn't exist at all in that era. Her great-grandfather had written an entire chapter on this mistake, a classic error made by inexperienced forgers. She froze. "No one else sees it, only me." The room grew quiet as Grant picked up a sleek golden pen, ready to sign. Maya's pulse quickened. Her palms grew sweaty. Her throat tightened. She tried to swallow back the fear, the voice inside her screaming, "If you speak, Everything could fall apart. If you stay silent, the truth dies. She stepped forward, just an inch. Her knee wobbled. Her foot bumped a glass sitting on a side table. The crash echoed through the room like an explosion. Everyone whipped their heads toward her. Preston's face twisted into open disgust. Grant's hand froze. The investors murmured angrily. Danielle rushed toward her. "Maya, honey, I'm so sorry, Mr. Whitmore. She didn't mean—" "Get her out," one investor snapped. "Unbelievable," another muttered. "She shouldn't even be here," Preston hissed. And that last part, snapped something deep inside Maya. She lifted her chin. Her voice started as a whisper, then grew. "Mr. Whitmore, that document is fake." Silence. Every jaw dropped. Even Danielle stopped breathing. Grant stared at her as if she'd grown wings. Preston's face drained of color. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Grant asked quietly, dangerously. Maya's legs trembled, but she stood her ground. "The document is fake," she repeated, louder, steadier. "And I can prove it." Preston barked a laugh, too sharp to be genuine. "Oh, for God's sake, listen to her. A child lecturing experts? This is ridiculous." But Grant didn't take his eyes off Maya. He looked intrigued. "Come here," he said softly. Danielle panicked. "No, please. She's just overwhelmed." But Grant raised a hand. "Let the girl speak." Maya approached the table. Her heart pounded so loudly she felt like the whole room heard it. She pointed. "The ink, real 17th century ink, would have corroded the parchment. This one sits on the surface. And the seal, the mark inside it wasn't used until a century later. It doesn't belong there." Preston scoffed. "Little girl, you don't know what you're—" Maya opened her great-grandfather's journal. The page flipped open to a hand-drawn diagram. The exact seal Preston claimed was authentic. And right there, in black and white, was the truth. Grant leaned in. His expression slowly shifted. From skepticism to confusion, to something close to awe. Preston stumbled over his words. That's... She's making this up." But no one was listening to him anymore. The room, moments earlier, buzzing with billion-dollar ambition, now held its breath. All because a young black girl in faded shoes dared to speak truth where no one expected it. And this was only the beginning. Before we move on, if you were in Maya's place, facing a room full of powerful men who thought you didn't belong, and tell me, do you think Grant Whitmore will believe Maya? Or will the room turn against her? Your answers decide how the next part feels. For a moment, nobody in the penthouse breathed. Grant Whitmore stood perfectly still, his pen hovering above the fraudulent document that had been seconds from binding a $250 million deal. Every investor in the room stared at Maya Ellington, this small black girl with trembling hands and a courage no one had expected, as if she had just split the sky open. Preston Hale was the first to break. "This is unbelievable," he snapped, his voice laced with panic disguised as anger. "We're wasting time listening to a maid's kid who doesn't know the first thing about—" "Enough!" Grant's voice was calm, but the kind of calm that made grown men step back. Maya felt her chest tighten. She didn't know whether he was angry at her or at Preston. She only knew her mother's fingers were digging into her arm, silently begging her to stay quiet, to stop talking before someone punished them for stepping out of line. But it was too late for silence. "Show me," Grant said to Maya. "Prove what you just said." Danielle's voice cracked. "Mr. Whitmore, please. She doesn't mean any harm." "I'm not asking if she means harm," Grant said without taking his eyes off Maya. "I'm asking her to show me the truth." And the room shifted, because truth coming from a black child made people tense. It challenged their assumptions. It forced them to look in a direction they didn't want to. Maya stepped closer to the massive table, aware of how impossibly small she looked next to the men in expensive suits. But she also felt something warm beside her. The imagined presence of her great-grandfather, the man whose journal she had studied since she was old enough to read. She opened the worn leather book. "My great-grandfather worked with historical documents," Maya said softly. "He wrote notes about forgeries, patterns, mistakes people make when they try to fake old things." She pointed to the parchment on the table. Real vellum from the 1600s has uneven thickness. You can see light through the thinner parts. This doesn't have any. Elliot Dawson, Grant's personal advisor, leaned in and held the parchment to the light. His eyebrows drew together. Grant stepped even closer, the tension in the room thickening. Maya continued, "The ink should be brownish. Old ink corrodes. This is modern. It's too clean, too perfect." Elliot nodded slowly. "She's right. I don't see any burn patterns." Grant's jaw tightened. Preston's voice pitched up in desperation. "This is ridiculous. You're taking the word of a child who clearly knows more than you do," Grant snapped. Preston flinched, but Maya wasn't finished. Her finger hovered over the crimson wax seal. "And this symbol, right there, wasn't used at the time this document claims to be from. Whoever made it didn't know that." Silence spread like wildfire. The investors exchanged worried glances. The air felt heavier, as if the penthouse itself sensed a storm coming. Preston's mask of confidence cracked completely. "You're going to jeopardize a multi-million-dollar deal because some little black girl thinks she found a typo?" He sneered, letting the racism drip out now that he was cornered. "Come on, Grant, look at her. Do you really believe she—" Grant's fist hit the table. Hard. Everyone jumped. "You don't speak about her like that," Grant said, his voice ice cold. Preston's face drained of color. He'd finally pushed too far. Danielle's breath hitched. No one had ever defended her daughter like that in a room full of powerful white men. Not once in her entire life. Grant straightened his suit and spoke with quiet authority. "Elliot," he said, "get Professor Leonard Avery on a secure video line. Now." Elliot nodded and rushed out. Preston tried again. "Grant, listen." Grant didn't even look at him. "No, you listen. If this document is fake, my company could lose hundreds of millions and fall into federal investigation. And you brought it to me." The implication was clear. Too clear. Minutes later, a large screen lit up, revealing Professor Leonard Avery, one of the most respected experts in historical manuscripts. "Grant," the professor greeted. "What's the emergency?" Grant gestured to the document. "We need you to authenticate this. Now!" The camera zoomed in as Elliot held the parchment up. Avery studied every detail. The ink, the texture, the seal Maya had pointed out. After a long, excruciating silence, the professor inhaled deeply. "Grant, this is a forgery." A wave of shocked gasps spread across the room. Danielle pressed a hand to her mouth. Maya felt her knees wobble, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming relief of being heard. Professor Avery continued, "Whoever made this did a good job, but they made amateur mistakes. The seal is the biggest giveaway." Grant closed his eyes, absorbing the betrayal. When he opened them again, they were sharp, cold steel. "Security," he said calmly. "Please escort Preston Hale and his associates to the private holding lounge. They are not to leave the building." Two guards stepped forward. Preston panicked. "Grant, wait! This is a misunderstanding." "You tried to scam me," Grant said quietly. "You tried to use my name, my trust, and my legacy. But the worst part?" His eyes flicked to Maya. "You thought no one in this room would question you, especially not a black child you underestimated." Preston was dragged away shouting, humiliated, defeated. The room exhaled. The energy shifted. The threat lifted, and all eyes turned to Maya. Grant approached her slowly, his expression softening. "You saved me," he said. "You saved my company, my reputation, my future." Maya swallowed. Her voice barely made it out. "I just told the truth." "And sometimes," Grant said, "truth needs someone brave enough to speak it." He did something unimaginable, something nobody expected from a billionaire who rarely smiled. He knelt, right there in front of everyone. A sign of respect so profound Danielle felt tears burn behind her eyes. "Maya Ellington," Grant said, "I owe you more than I can ever repay." The world suddenly felt bigger than the walls of the penthouse, and yet, something inside Maya whispered, "This story isn't over, not even close." Because she had no idea what Grant Whitmore was about to offer her next. Not yet, but everything was about to change. The days after the confrontation at Whitmore Tower felt unreal to Maya and Danielle Ellington. They returned home to their cramped apartment on the east side of the city, expecting life to fall back into its familiar rhythm. The squeaky hallway light, the peeling paint, the old heater that rattled like bones whenever it turned on. But nothing felt the same. Something had shifted, and the shift had a name: Grant Whitmore. 2 mornings later, a sleek black car pulled up outside their building. A car so out of place among the aging brick walls and narrow streets that neighbors peeked through their blinds. A uniformed driver stepped out and asked for Miss Danielle and Miss Maya Ellington. Danielle almost shut the door in panic, thinking some mistake had been made. But when the driver handed her a sealed envelope embossed with the Whitmore family crest, her hands began to tremble. Inside was a handwritten note. "Please join me at Whitmore Tower. I have something important to show you. Grant Whitmore." Danielle clutched the letter to her chest, overwhelmed. "Lord, what now?" But Maya felt something else, a nervous spark that made her heart flip. She couldn't explain it, but deep down she knew. This wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning. Whitmore Tower looked even more intimidating the second time. But this time, when the elevator opened to the top floor, Grant wasn't surrounded by investors or bodyguards. He was waiting for them alone, smiling in a way that softened the sharpness of his features. "I'm glad you came," he said warmly. "There's something I want to share with you both." He motioned toward a hidden elevator panel that slid open silently. Maya's eyes widened. She hadn't noticed this door last time, and she had paid attention to everything. "Follow me," Grant said. The elevator descended into a quiet, dimly lit space. When the doors opened, Maya gasped. She stepped into a breathtaking private library, a cathedral of knowledge. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, heavy with centuries of history, leather-bound books, glass cases filled with artifacts, ancient scrolls resting like sleeping treasure. "This," Grant said, "is the Whitmore Archives. My grandfather built the foundation of this library. I've spent my life expanding it." Maya couldn't move. Yeah, the room felt like magic, like destiny. Danielle stared around, breathless. "Mr. Whitmore, why bring us here?" Grant looked at Maya and then at Danielle. "Because your daughter saved something far more important than money," he said softly. "She saved my trust in truth, in integrity, in the belief that brilliance can come from places the world too often overlooks, especially when that brilliance belongs to someone black." Danielle blinked back tears. Grant continued, "I don't want what happened in that penthouse to be just a moment. I want it to be the beginning of something meaningful." He turned to Maya. "So I have an offer for both of you." Maya held her breath. "First," Grant said, "Danielle, I want to offer you a permanent position here. Not as a cleaner, not as staff, but as the full-time caretaker and curator's assistant for the Whitmore Archives." Danielle's jaw dropped. A curator's assistant? "Mr. Whitmore, I don't have a degree. You have dedication, intelligence, and the steadiness this collection needs," Grant replied. "Everything else can be taught, but character, integrity, that's not teachable. And you pass those qualities to your daughter." Tears spilled down Danielle's cheeks. Then Grant knelt slightly, just enough to be level with Maya. "As for you," he said gently, "I'd like to start a mentorship program, something I've never done before. You would have access to tutors, historians, linguists, and this archive. You'd learn how to authenticate artifacts, how to protect history from deception. If you accept, the Whitmore Foundation will sponsor your education all the way through college." Maya's breath caught. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Grant smiled. "You have a gift, Maya, and gifts deserve space to grow." The library filled with a heavy silence, the kind that precedes a life-changing yes. But Maya wasn't thinking about scholarship money or prestige. She thought of her mother washing dishes at midnight after long days. She thought of how people in that penthouse looked at them, as if truth couldn't possibly come from someone who looked like them. She thought of her great-grandfather's journal, and how he had believed truth belonged to everyone bold enough to speak it. Finally, her voice returned. "I want to help protect the truth," Maya said softly. just like my great-grandfather did. Grant's eyes warmed with pride. Then it's settled. Danielle pulled Maya into her arms, sobbing quietly into her daughter's hair. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by survival, but by possibility. Over the next months, everything changed. Maya spent her afternoons in the Whitmore archives, learning to carbon date ink samples, identify handwriting patterns, and read ancient scripts. Scholars from universities visited just to meet the little truth teller from Whitmore Tower. Some came skeptical, all of them left astonished. Danielle thrived in her new role. Her attention to detail, her loyalty, her quiet strength made her indispensable. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, valued, respected. Grant visited often, not as a billionaire checking projections, but as a mentor who genuinely enjoyed listening to Maya's discoveries. One afternoon, he found her studying an artifact he'd always believed was authentic. She looked up at him, hesitant but confident. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "this piece might not be what you think." Grant laughed softly. "Somehow, Maya, I'm not surprised." And he meant it as the greatest compliment. Months later, during a formal ceremony launching the Whitmore-Ellington Initiative for Historical Integrity, Grant stood before scholars, journalists, and influential leaders. He cleared his throat and said, "Truth does not belong to the powerful. It belongs to those brave enough to speak it." I learned that from a 10-year-old black girl who refused to stay silent. He motioned to Maya, who stood shyly beside her mother. "And because of her courage," he continued, "we are building something new. A future where truth is protected by voices that were once ignored, by voices that deserve to be heard." Maya felt a warmth bloom in her chest. Pride, hope, belonging. This was no longer just Grant's library. It was their legacy now. A legacy born from bravery, struggle, and truth. And for the first time, Maya knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was never invisible. The world had simply needed to learn how to see her. What part of Maya's journey moved you the most? Her courage, her intelligence, or her resilience? Do you believe small voices can change powerful rooms? Comment yes or no. If this story touched you, comment 111 below. And tell me, you're watching from which country? And don't forget, share this story so more people can feel its message.